Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Trumbore with your nightly review for Tuesday, March 19. It is 4:01 p.m. Eastern Time. Very quickly, I apologize for the delay in publishing last night. It's YouTube related, very frustrating. Dow Jones, after being down almost all day, finished up 4 points to 14,456. The S&P 500 was down 3 to 1548. And NASDAQ finished down 8 points to 3229. Gold finished at $16.11, up $7. Oil $92.20, down $1.50. And the yield on the 10-year Treasury fell to 1.91%. Tokyo was up 2%. London down 0.3%. Paris down 1.3%. And Frankfurt down 0.8%. And China was up 0.8% as new President Xi Jinping met with U.S. Treasury Secretary Jack Lew in Beijing, and their meeting apparently was okay. Cybersecurity at the top of the agenda. We'll get more details later. Of course, China's actions will be rather important instead of talk. Very solid housing starts number for the month of February today. Also housing permits, building permits, the best level since June of 2008, so the economic news continues to be pretty solid. Home building, autos, the energy boom, all seems to be offsetting the negatives, the tax hikes, the sequester, gas prices, crimping consumer spending. Many of the retailers have warned the past few months, but it's the recovery of household net worth. Those with relatively stable jobs must feel a little better. But the Eurozone issues certainly hurt, especially for U.S. multinationals some of whom generate at least 20% of their sales from the Euro region. So always keep that in the back of your mind when you're investing in individual issues. The Federal Reserve started its two-day meeting today. Tomorrow will be Ben Bernanke's press conference and the important post-meeting statement, and the Fed will update its economic forecast, which in the past, as the Journal once again pointed out today, have been absolutely miserable. They have totally understated growth, and they have been way too pessimistic on the unemployment rate. House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan told Bloomberg News today, quote, "We want to get a down payment on deficit and debt reduction. We think that's good for the economy. We think that's good for the credit markets. We think that's good for confidence. And that is where we hope to end up at the end of the day here. We understand the president's not going to take all of our entitlement reforms." He said he expects the House on Thursday to pass a stopgap spending measure, which is being considered in the Senate to avert the government shutdown on March 27. I do just want to add that back to the U.S. market, the strategists at Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, and Goldman Sachs all on Monday, I didn't get a chance to cover this, lifted their 2013 price targets, all of them talking about a better second half to the year. Adam Parker, my man from Morgan Stanley, who's been bearish, he turned bullish. He has said he's underestimated the Fed's power to levitate markets. In November, Parker had thought the S&P would finish 2013 at 1434, and he's raised his target to 1600, while David Bianco of Deutsche Bank and David Kostin at Goldman Sachs both raised their S&P target to 1625. Kostin raised his earnings per share estimate for the S&P to $108, so you can do your own valuation games. And again, the S&P finished today at 1548. Okay, Cyprus. All kinds of stuff. The Parliament, a couple hours ago, rejected a proposed one-time tax on deposits. And in an apparent message of defiance towards the rest of the Eurozone, the Cypriot Parliament overwhelmingly defeated the levy plan. Not a single lawmaker voted in favor of it. 36 against, 19 abstentions. Parliament supposedly is now adjourned until Thursday. Outright default is a possibility without a resolution soon. Michael Saris, the Cypriot finance minister, flew to Moscow a little while ago for talks with President Putin and the Kremlin, which has strongly criticized the proposed levy on bank deposits. I mean, the situation is such that Irish Prime Minister Enda Kenny felt compelled to reassure Irish citizens that depositors with less than 100,000 euro will be protected and no risk of contagion from Cyprus. So anyway, in Cyprus, at least the banks they're shut until at least Thursday. The stock market has been closed all this time. Apparently a new plan that then has been voted down would have kept the 6.75% tax on deposits over 20,000 euro instead of 100, and those over 100,000 euro would be charged 9.9% as opposed to 6.75 on the first 100,000. I don't know if I made that clear. An EU official said Cyprus could meet its target of generating 5.8 billion euro by imposing a 15.6% levy on deposits more than 100,000. So that's of course what would hit Russians. Russians hold, and there are all kinds of figures. One has it that they hold 15.4 billion of 64.8 billion euro in deposits to Cypriot banks. Of course, the Russian money is there because of low taxes, the ease of converting rubles into euros, no questions asked, laundered properly. Another figure has Russians holding 21 of 70 billion euro. It's confusing. Russia could terminate a 2.5 billion loan to Cyprus, terms of which were being renegotiated, and that's what Michael Saris, the Cypriot finance minister, has flown to Moscow about. I mean, this is about the legality of both taxing deposits that are supposed to be insured up to 100,000 euro and confiscating sums above that. A deal that perhaps the German parliament would approve has resulted in serious collateral damage to the credibility of policymakers in the Eurozone and the IMF. A little more on that in a second. I mean, this is how dysfunctional the Cypriots are. The Cyprus Central Bank chief has warned, and follow this, that scrapping the tax on small savers would kill the plan to raise 5.8 billion euros in total from bank deposits. He also predicted account holders could suddenly withdraw 10% or more of the total in Cypriot banks if the levy was imposed. But at the same time, he said he favored imposing the levy only on accounts above 100,000. But he said the plan is killed unless you tax those under 100,000. And that's the central bank chief. From a Cypriot government spokesman, they said that if the first 100,000 euro weren't included in the levy, the target wouldn't be reached. Our creditors were asking that Cyprus close down the two big banks, transfer deposits to a healthy bank, and liquidate the rest of the deposits. But he added that the International Monetary Fund, during the negotiations, had even gone so far as to suggest a 40% cut on certain deposits, or to freeze deposits for up to 5 to 10 years. Megan Green from Bloomberg wrote an excellent piece. This is a very small portion of it. The one-off deposit levy was agreed to as part of the Cypriot bailout for two reasons. First, Germany's main opposition party, the Social Democrats, demanded that depositors participate in the bailout so that German funds wouldn't be used to bail out Russian oligarchs with money of questionable origin. The German government can't pass the Cyprus bailout in the Bundestag without the Social Democrats' support, so it had to cater to this demand. Second, the International Monetary Fund insisted that Cyprus' debt burden would be unsustainable if the country received all of the 17 billion euro that it needs in the form of bailout loans. So to reduce the size of the bailout, policymakers had three options: write down sovereign debt, write down bank debt, or raid deposits. Raiding deposits seemed the most expedient way to shrink the size of the bailout, but in reality this just ensures that additional money will have to be stumped up for Cyprus, or that Cyprus will have to restructure its debt, or both. Jan Tichau, director of the Brussels Center of the Carnegie Endowment, said the big question is whether Merkel can get it through the Bundestag. With elections looming, the temptation of the opposition may be to say no and leave her looking naked and stupid. While the main opposition parties have mostly voted with the government on crisis-related issues, with each vote on aid, such as the last ballot on a revised Greek aid package, Merkel's margin has been dropping. She only has 39% support right now for the September 22nd election. Her main coalition partner is polling at just 4%, so they wouldn't even qualify for seats. So suddenly, the German election that looked like a sure thing last year is not so much so. And it's not just Europeans and Russians who are torqued off about Cyprus. Joseph Torby of the World Union of Arab Bankers warned Cyprus is facing a historic challenge that cannot support any mistakes. The Cypriot parliament must reject, as they did, this miserable plan which will not only lead to the migration of Arab and international deposits, but also deal a blow to Cyprus as an international financial hub in the region. It is unfair to burden the Arab banks with the cost of increasing the capital of the troubled Cypriot banks. The customers of these banks should not pay the price of this decision. Now that's on Cyprus for now. In Syria, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said the U.S. would not stop others from arming the rebels in a main opposition group prepared to set up a rival government to President Bashar Assad. Kerry said the United States does not stand in the way of other countries that made a decision to provide arms, whether it's France or Britain or others. And a Syrian warplane or warplanes struck Lebanese territory on Monday. Actually hit Lebanon's territory. Of course, they've shelled Lebanon territory, but I'd say that's an example of spillover, wouldn't you? Today's the 10-year anniversary of the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq, and so Iraq celebrated with a wave of car bombings and such that killed 65 at least. I saw the death toll this morning at 21, and by like an hour ago it was up to 65. The deadliest day of attacks in Iraq since September 9. Targeted mostly Shiite areas, which means it's Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And regarding Iraq, from the Financial Times, 8 days after the invasion, on March 19, 2003, Paul Wolfowitz, then Deputy Defense Secretary, told a congressional committee, "We are dealing with a country that can really finance its own reconstruction and relatively soon." Well, a Financial Times analysis finds that the U.S. has overwhelmingly borne the brunt of both the military and reconstruction costs, spending at least $138 billion on private security, logistics, and reconstruction contractors. And that $138 billion, the Financial Times says, is very conservative. No one has benefited more than KBR, Kellogg Brown and Root, the subsidiary of Halliburton. For its part, KBR says it has performed with honor and sacrifice in a hostile, complex, ambiguous, and unpredictable environment, preparing and serving up more than 1 billion meals and delivering 265 tons of ice. You know that new massive embassy complex of ours in Baghdad? Just the private security contractors for the complex, the cost is estimated at well over $3 billion over the next 5 years. And a tragedy today at a Nevada military depot used for important training. 7 Marines from a North Carolina unit at Camp Lejeune were killed in a mortar accident when the mortar exploded unexpectedly, again as part of some kind of training exercise. Details to follow, so our sympathies. Big time to the families. Always keep the men and women of our armed forces in your thoughts and prayers. That's the first robin of the summer, of the spring. Hopefully you hear that in the background. That's all for tonight. I'll be back with you on Wednesday. Take care.